My mom gave me and my sister expired food for 15 years while our golden child brother got fresh meals. Now she expects us to fund her retirement home. Can you imagine a mother, your own flesh and blood, deliberately feeding you spoiled, expired food your entire childhood, while your brother ate like royalty? That was my life. And when she finally came begging for help, the satisfaction of finally giving her what she deserved was unlike anything I'd ever felt. IT started when I was 6, my sister Colleen was 4, and our older brother Keith was 10. Keith was Mom's sun, moon, and stars, her obvious favorite. He played football, looked just like Dad before Dad walked out, and somehow pulled straight A's without even trying. Every Saturday, Mom would come home from grocery shopping with bags overflowing with fresh meat, crisp vegetables, warm bread, and cold milk. That was for the main kitchen for Keith. Then she'd pull out a separate, smaller bag just for Colleen and me. Dented cans, bread speckled with green mold, milk that was one day from expiring, the yogurt, already past its date of course. Our food went into a little fridge in the cold, damp basement. That's where your food is, she'd tell us, her voice flat. Keith ate upstairs in the light from the big, clean kitchen. We ate from the basement. If we ever dared to sneak upstairs, to even think about grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl, she'd scream. Oh, she'd scream, accusing us of stealing Keith's food. I was 8 when I got food poisoning from expired lunch meat. 3 days I threw up, writhing on the bathroom floor, the cold tiles pressed against my cheek. My stomach felt like it was tearing itself apart. Mom just stood in the doorway, dismissive. You're being dramatic, she said, without an ounce of concern. 2 years later, Colleen was 7 when bad milk sent her to the ER with violent stomach cramps. Mom brushed it off. She probably caught something at school. When our teacher started asking why our lunches smelled funny, Mom had an answer for that too. We were picky eaters, she'd declare with a practiced smile, who only liked aged cheese and fermented foods. Can you believe that? I still remember Keith bringing friends over. Mom would cook them steak dinners, sizzling juicy steaks. Meanwhile, Colleen and I would be huddled in the basement, spoons scraping the bottoms of cans of expired ravioli, the metallic taste always too strong. Oh, the girls have sensitive stomachs, she'd explain to his friends. They need special food. But here's the thing Mom didn't count on. All that sickness, all that struggle, it built something in me. My immune system became a fortress. By high school, I literally never missed a day. Perfect attendance opened doors, leading to scholarship opportunities one never dreamed of. I also learned to cook properly, not just to make food palatable, but to understand ingredients, to stretch them, to make expired things decent. I became obsessed with food safety, nutrition, preservation. Culinary school, full ride. Colleen, my brave little sister, went into nursing. Pediatric nutrition, specifically. She wanted to ensure no other child ever went through what we did. Keith peaked in high school. He failed out of college by 22, moved back home, and he never left. Now he's 38, still in Mom's house, working part-time at a hardware store. Meanwhile, I became head chef at a 5-star restaurant by 28. Opened my own place at 32. Got reviewed in the New York Times. 3 locations now. Colleen, she runs an entire pediatric nutrition program at the Children's Hospital, changing lives every single day. The day we turned 18, Colleen and I cut Mom off. Cold turkey. 15 years. 15 years I hadn't stepped foot in that house. Mom never called, never apologized, nothing. Not a word. Then last week she showed up. Not at my home but at my flagship restaurant. Not to congratulate me, not to share in my success. She needed money. Turns out Keith couldn't support her anymore. The house was falling apart. Her social security wasn't enough. She wanted Colleen and me to pay for a retirement home. A nice one. She'd already picked it out. $1,000 a month. She figured we could split it. Since you're both so successful. Her words. I raised you, she declared, her chin jutted out. I kept a roof over your heads. Fed you every day. Now it's your turn to take care of me. Actually laughed. Right there, in the middle of my own restaurant. A choked, bitter laugh. Fed us. She fed us garbage. While treating Keith like a king. My sous chef, Carlos, looked concerned, his eyes wide. I waved him off. Told Mom I needed to check something in the kitchen. Instead I called Colleen. Told her to meet me at Mom's house tomorrow, with her husband. Then I called my lawyer friend Russell. Asked him to prepare something special. The next day, Colleen, her husband Jack Russell, and I pulled up to Mom's house. Keith answered the door, still in his bathrobe, at 2 p.m. The house reeked of mildew. Mom was in the living room, already prattling on about payment schedules for her luxury retirement home. I walked straight up to her and handed her the paper Russell had drafted. "What's this?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "An invoice," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands. "For all the medical bills from food poisoning, the therapy for the eating disorders Colleen developed, the dental work from malnutrition, comes to $87,000. Pay that, and we'll talk about your retirement." Her face drained of all color. She went white, then started sputtering about ungrateful children, about everything she'd sacrificed. Colleen cut her off, her voice like a razor. "You fed us expired food for 15 years while Keith ate like a king. You know what I found when I was 14, Mom? Your grocery receipts. You were buying our expired food on purpose, from a discount salvage store, saving money on feeding your daughters, so Keith could have name-brand everything." Keith, who had been standing there silently, looked utterly bewildered. "What expired food?" he mumbled. Mom had never told him. He actually thought we had genuinely sensitive stomachs, special dietary needs, all those years. I pulled out my phone and showed him photos. "Remember your 16th birthday, Keith? Steak dinner upstairs." Swipe. "Colleen and I ate expired canned ravioli in the basement. Mom told you we were at a sleepover. We were down there the whole time." Keith's face went from confusion to dawning horror. He stared at Mom, who was now a ghastly white, then red, then white again. She reached for his arm, but he recoiled so fast he nearly stumbled. The look he gave her, I'd never seen anything like it. It was like he was seeing a stranger. Her mouth opened but nothing came out. Then the words tumbled out, fast and desperate. "I was just trying to be practical," she cried, "making tough choices as a single mother with 3 kids and no help." She insisted the food was perfectly safe, just past some random date that didn't mean anything. She claimed we were always so picky, always turning our noses up at everything. So what was the point of wasting good money on food we'd complain about? Keith just kept staring, his eyes getting wider and wider, a silent accusation. Colleen's voice, when she spoke again, cut through the room like a blade. I'd never heard her sound so cold, so sharp, so utterly done. She pulled out her own phone, swiping through photos. She held the screen up to Keith. Moldy bread, green and white fuzz blooming across the crust. Cans so bloated the metal bulged outward. Milk with chunks floating in yellowish liquid. Yogurt with a dark, wet film on top. Keith looked at each one, his face paler with every swipe. Mom started shouting now, louder, claiming the photos were fake, exaggerated, taken out of context. But Colleen just kept swiping, showing him more and more evidence of what we'd eaten for 15 years. By the way, if you're still with me on this unbelievable journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I promise there are more stories like this, even more shocking, coming your way. Suddenly, Keith turned and ran for the bathroom. We heard him throw up, the sound echoing through the quiet, stale house. Mom yelled after him that we were being dramatic, manipulating him, turning her son against her with lies. Russell shifted beside me, and I could almost hear his lawyer brain cataloging her every word. I spoke then, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "We have documentation for everything, Mom. Medical records from all the times you dismissed my food poisoning. Hospital visits for Colleen's stomach issues. Dental records showing the damage from malnutrition." Russell added that we also had testimony from teachers who noticed the lunches, and remembered Mom's explanations about our supposed special dietary needs. Mom's face twisted into something ugly, all her careful facade crumbling. Keith came back from the bathroom, looking like a ghost, gray-tinged skin, breathing hard. He walked straight to Mom and asked her directly, "Is it true? Did you really buy their food from a salvage store on purpose?" Mom didn't answer. She just stood there, her mouth a thin line, her eyes darting between Keith and the door, calculating an escape. Keith sat down heavily on the couch, burying his head in his hands. Jack, Colleen's husband, spoke for the first time. "As a pediatrician," he said, his voice calm and professional, "I've seen cases of child neglect before. This absolutely qualifies as deliberate abuse. Withholding adequate nutrition from children, while providing it for another, shows clear favoritism and intentional harm." Mom whipped around, shrill. "He's an outsider. He has no right to judge my parenting choices. He doesn't know what it's like to to raise 3 kids alone with barely any money. Jack just stood there, his hand on Colleen's shoulder, unwavering. Colleen stood up. "We're leaving. Mom, you shouldn't expect any money from us. For your retirement home, or anything else." Mom's anger instantly morphed into panic. She started talking about being homeless, having nowhere to go, how we couldn't just abandon her. Keith, still with his head in his hands, suddenly asked, his voice quiet but cutting, "How much money did you save, Mom, by feeding them expired food instead of fresh, like you bought for me?" The question hung in the air. Mom couldn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. We walked towards the door. Mom started screaming. "Ungrateful daughters," she shrieked. "After everything I sacrificed, you're abandoning me in my time of need, leaving me to die alone." Russell opened the door, and we filed out one by one. Keith didn't follow. Through the window, I saw him still on the couch, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Mom's voice followed us all the way to our cars, getting higher and more desperate with every step we took away. As I watched Colleen collapse against Jack in their car, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest, I felt nothing. My body was there, but my brain was detached. My phone buzzed. It was Carlos, my sous chef, asking if I was okay, if he should handle dinner prep without me. Seeing his name on my screen brought everything crashing back. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I texted back, "1 hour. Be there soon." Russell came over, placing a hand on my shoulder. He said he'd send Mom an official cease and desist, and suggested reporting the childhood abuse to Adult Protective Services, not for prosecution, but to create an official record. I nodded, got in my car before he could see my face, whatever it was doing. Colleen was still crying as I drove past. For 2 days, I buried myself in work, trying not to think about Mom's twisted face or Keith on that couch. Then, just before dinner service, Carlos came back to my office, looking uncomfortable. Keith was at the front asking to talk. His eyes were red, his clothes looked slept in. Something in his face made me take him back to my office. He sat down, placing a folder on my desk. He'd been through Mom's financial records, found receipts going back 20 years from that salvage store. He spread them out, rows of purchases for expired meat, dented cans, outdated dairy. The savings added up to over $30,000. He'd cross-referenced them with other receipts, and found where that money went. His sports equipment, his college attempts, his car. Every dollar she saved by feeding us garbage went straight to making his life better. Keith started crying. Not quiet tears, but full-on gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. He kept saying he never knew that if he had, he would have done something. I watched him fall apart, unsure if I believed him. He'd always been Mom's favorite, and he liked it that way. He liked being the special one. But his horror seemed genuine, like he was seeing his entire childhood from a different angle, realizing he'd been standing on a pile of our suffering the whole time. I realized then, he was another kind of victim of Mom's manipulation. She'd used him as a weapon against us, without him even knowing it. "What do you want from me, Keith?" My voice was flat, tired. He looked up, saying he didn't want anything except to understand why. So I told him the truth. Mom resented having daughters. She saw Keith as the continuation of Dad, and Colleen and me as burdens she was stuck with after Dad left. 2 extra mouths she never wanted. Every time she looked at us, she saw the life she could have had if she'd only had 1 kid. Keith's face went even paler. He asked if there was any way to make this right. I was honest. "I don't know if there is, Keith. The damage is done. Our childhood is gone. No amount of apologies or money can give us back those years of being hungry, sick, and scared in that basement. No amount of sorry can undo the food poisoning or the shame or the stomach aches." He nodded, as if he expected that answer, but it still hurt to hear it. Keith told me he was moving out. He'd already started looking for apartments. He was done supporting Mom financially. His part-time paycheck barely covered utilities anyway. And now he knew where his whole childhood was spent. Every football cleat, every Letterman jacket, bought with money saved from our suffering. He couldn't live with that anymore. I believed him about that much, at least. After he left, I sat in my office, staring at those receipts. Then I called Colleen. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was hard. Keith had 38 years to notice something was wrong, and he chose not to see it. He ate his fresh meals upstairs while we got sick sick in the basement, and never once asked why. She wasn't ready to forgive him, just because he'd finally opened his eyes. I told her I understood. I wasn't asking her to forgive him, I just wanted her to know what happened. The next week, Mom started calling my restaurant constantly. Carlos brought me a stack of message slips with increasingly desperate voicemails. Some begged me to reconsider. Others threatened to tell everyone what terrible daughters we were. Some rambled about her sacrifices. Carlos, bless him, started screening my calls without me even asking. He'd answer, hear Mom's voice, tell her I wasn't available, and hang up. I was grateful, even as I hated that my staff was witnessing this family mess. The line cooks started giving me sympathetic looks. Servers whispered in corners. Everyone knew something was wrong with the boss. Russell filed the report with Adult Protective Services. I found out a few days later when a number I didn't recognize popped up on my phone. Randolph Cross from APS. He explained they couldn't prosecute decades-old child abuse, but they wanted to talk about Mom's current situation. I met him at my restaurant. I spread out everything. My medical records, the salvage store receipts Keith found, photos of the basement fridge I'd taken years ago, just in case. Randolph went through each document slowly, his face professionally neutral, but I saw the disgust in his eyes. He made notes asking about dates, details. He told me Keith had already contacted them, providing info about Mom's mental state since our confrontation. She'd been getting worse, swinging between rage and self-pity. Randolph said they'd do a home visit, assess her. 3 days later, Keith called. His voice was different, lighter. He'd found an apartment, a tiny studio, but it felt like freedom. He was learning to cook finally, and he was seeing a therapist, Malene Wagner, who specialized in family trauma. She was helping him understand the dynamics that kept him blind. Mom had manipulated him, made him the golden child, while creating a separate reality for us. He kept saying he never knew. I listened. When he finished, I said I was glad he was getting help. The conversation ended awkwardly. 30 years of different childhoods don't bridge easily, but at least we were talking. Mom somehow got my personal cell number. My phone buzzed at 11 p.m. A long text message, running into multiple texts. She was going to be homeless. It would be my fault. She'd die alone on the street. She'd sacrificed everything. How ungrateful we were. I screenshotted every message, sent them to Russell. He responded immediately, even at that hour, adding it to harassment documentation, block her number. I did. The silence afterward felt like relief. Colleen called the next morning, suggesting lunch. Somewhere neutral. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. She'd been having nightmares about the basement fridge, waking up tasting expired milk, feeling 6 years old again. The nightmares started after our confrontation with Mom. Like speaking the truth out loud had unlocked something buried deep. Jack was supportive, but he couldn't truly understand. I told her about Keith, and she listened, her face unreadable. She wasn't ready to forgive him. 38 years of willful ignorance couldn't be erased by a few weeks of therapy and guilt. I didn't argue. We talked about therapy. Colleen suggested we both needed it, individually. She'd found Gregory Potats, who worked with adult survivors of childhood abuse. I pulled out my phone right there and scheduled my first session. 3 days later, Keith texted. He wanted to meet with both Colleen and me. His therapist thought it would help him to hear directly from us how the abuse affected us. Colleen was resistant. She didn't owe Keith anything, she said. Wasn't interested in helping him feel better. But I convinced her. One meeting, public neutral, we could leave any time. She agreed. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Keith was already there, looking terrible, like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. Pale, red-eyed. He stood when he saw us, but didn't hug or shake hands, just gestured to the chairs. Colleen sat furthest from him, defensive. I sat between them, letting the warmth of my coffee cup ground me. Keith didn't make excuses. He just looked at us and asked us to tell him what it was really like. Colleen spoke first, her voice steady, but her hands shaking around her cup. The constant stomach aches, the embarrassment at school, feeling worthless. She talked about developing an eating disorder in high school, unable to trust food. I told Keith about being 8, lying on that bathroom floor for 3 days, throwing up. Mom's dismissal. Colleen bringing me water when Mom wasn't looking. After that, I started smelling everything. Every piece of food inspected, sniffed, examined. Holding bread up to the light for mold spots. Smelling milk even when the date was good, because I knew those dates meant nothing in our house. The anxiety uncertainty around meals never went away. Even now, at my own restaurant with the freshest ingredients, I still catch myself checking expiration dates 3 times. I wake up some nights tasting spoiled food that isn't there. My therapist says it's a trauma response. My brain's still trying to protect that scared kid. Keith sat completely still, tears streaming down his face, dripping onto his shirt. He didn't wipe them away. When we finished, he took a shaky breath. His voice was broken. He was so sorry. He had no idea. He would have done something. It sounded genuine, but I was still unsure. He said he was going to confront Mom himself, demand she acknowledge what she did, hear it from her own mouth. Colleen's response was immediate and sharp. Mom will never admit wrongdoing. She spent too many years justifying her actions to herself. She built an entire story in her head about being a struggling single mother who did her best. She warned him he was setting himself up for disappointment. But Keith shook his head. He needed to try for his own closure. 2 weeks passed before Keith texted. The confrontation had gone exactly as Colleen predicted. Mom denied everything, said we were exaggerating, misremembering. She deflected blame onto Dad, onto us for being expensive, onto the world for not giving her enough money. She claimed the expired food was fine, that dates were just suggestions, that we turned out healthy, so obviously it wasn't that bad. Keith said she got angry when he pushed back, accused him of betraying her, told him to get out of her house. But something shifted in Keith. He called me a few days later, his voice clearer. He finally saw Mom clearly. The selfishness, the cruelty that Colleen and I grew up with every day. He understood now why we cut her off. He said watching her deny, deflect, and blame opened his eyes to how she'd manipulated him his entire life. He'd been her favorite because he served her needs, made her look good. The moment he questioned her, she turned on him, just like she'd always turned on us. Mom's landlord called Keith 3 weeks later. Mom had listed him as her emergency contact years ago. The house needed major repairs she couldn't afford. Leaking roof, dying furnace, dangerous electrical. 30 days to repair or move out. Keith told the landlord he was no longer involved in Mom's finances and suggested social services. He texted me right after asking if he'd done the right thing. Told him yes. Mom's housing situation wasn't his responsibility anymore. Randolph from APS called me a week later. They'd completed their investigation. They couldn't force her, but they'd connected her with resources for low-income senior housing. A subsidized apartment, $300 a month, clean, safe. Everything she actually needed. Randolph had personally walked her through the application. He was optimistic. Mom refused immediately. She called Randolph back, saying she deserved better than some cramped apartment in a building full of old people. She still insisted on the $8,000 retirement home. She told Randolph her daughters were obligated to pay for it. Randolph called me back, sounding tired. Nothing more they could do if she wouldn't accept help. My therapy sessions with Gregory were helping me understand Mom's refusal. Her denial wasn't about us. It was about her inability to face what kind of mother she'd been. Admitting she deliberately fed her daughters expired food would shatter her self-image as a struggling, doing her best single mother. Some people would rather die defending their false narrative than face the truth. That wasn't something Colleen or I could fix. Keith started showing up at my restaurant every Thursday evening. He'd sit at the bar, chat with Carlos, learn about cooking. Mom had never taught him anything because she'd always just done everything for him. He was learning to cook properly for the first time, building skills he should have learned 20 years ago. 3 weeks after Keith started his visits, a woman named Grace messaged me on Instagram. Keith's been seeing her, she wrote. He told her everything. She wanted to understand the family dynamics. I met her. She was tall with direct brown eyes. No fake sympathy. She asked specific questions about our childhood, Keith's role. She took notes on her phone, explaining she was a social worker. She'd been encouraging Keith to build relationships with Colleen and me, if we were open to it. He talked about us constantly, about the guilt. Grace leaned forward, lowering her voice. Keith was having panic attacks, she said, waking up in the middle of the night, thinking about all the ways he benefited from our suffering. The sports equipment, the college tuition, the car. All of it came from money saved by feeding us expired food. He'd been adding it up obsessively. I stirred my wine. I told Grace that while Keith was part of the system Mom created, he was also a kid who didn't know. Mom made the choice to abuse us. Keith benefited, but he didn't cause it. There's a difference. I called Colleen the next day. Told her about Grace. Colleen stared out the window for a long time. She asked if I thought we were ready to have Keith in our lives. I said I didn't know. He seemed genuine. But rebuilding trust after 30 years wasn't going to happen in a few weeks. She agreed. Her therapist said healing takes years. Keith would have to prove himself through consistent actions, not just words and guilt. We decided to stay open but keep our boundaries firm, our expectations low. 2 months later, Keith called, sounding stressed. Mom's house was going into foreclosure. She'd stopped paying the mortgage. She thought if she got desperate enough, Colleen and I would cave. The bank sale happened faster than expected. Mom had 30 days. Keith helped her move into the subsidized senior apartment. He couldn't abandon her completely, he said, but he was keeping firm boundaries. No money, no guilt trips, no emotional dumping ground. A week after the move, Mom tried one last manipulation. She called Keith, crying, claiming a serious, uninsured health condition requiring $10,000 immediately. "You're my only hope," she wailed. Keith asked for documentation, diagnosis, treatment plan, anything official. Mom got angry. He should just trust her. A son should believe his mother. Keith insisted. Mom couldn't provide anything. She'd made it up. Keith told me about it. I heard something broken in his voice. That final lie had shattered whatever remaining illusion he'd had about Mom being a good person. That lie changed things for Keith in a way all the previous revelations hadn't. He called Mom the next day and told her he was going low contact. He'd check on her welfare once a month, but otherwise he needed space to heal. She screamed about abandonment. Keith stayed calm, ended the call. He texted me afterward. Hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the most necessary. Protecting himself wasn't abandoning her. It was setting healthy boundaries. 3 months after our initial confrontation, Colleen and I met Keith and Grace for dinner at my restaurant. I reserved a private table. It was awkward at first, but then Grace told a story about Keith trying to cook dinner for her and accidentally using salt instead of sugar in the dessert. That broke the tension. We started laughing, really laughing. Keith told another story about burning pasta. Colleen shared about Jack setting off the smoke alarm trying to make her breakfast in bed. We spent 2 hours talking, laughing. It felt like we were building something new, something not defined by our childhood or Mom's abuse, but by who we were choosing to become now. Keith waited until dessert. He'd enrolled in community college, business management. He wanted a career. Grace squeezed his hand under the table. I saw a real partnership there, someone who supported him becoming better. Keith looked at Colleen and me. He knew he couldn't fix the past, couldn't make up for the years he spent oblivious. "But I want you to know," he said, "I'm trying to become someone you might actually want as a brother." Colleen reached across the table and squeezed his other hand. Her gesture said enough. I started seeing Gregory twice a week. He suggested EMDR therapy for the food poisoning incident when I was 8. We sat in his office. I followed the moving dot with my eyes, remembering that bathroom floor, the taste of bile, the way my stomach cramped. Gregory asked about the distress level. Started at a 9. We did the eye movements. I saw myself 6 years old, scared. More eye movements. The memory shifted. I saw myself now, successful and strong, reaching back to that little girl and telling her she survived. By the end of the sessio, and the distress was down to a 3. I walked out feeling like someone had removed a weight from my chest that I'd been carrying so long I forgot it was there. The next day, Carlos said I seemed different, lighter. I told him I was working through some old stuff. He nodded. Colleen called me 2 weeks later, her voice high and excited. Her hospital was launching a program to screen children for food problems and nutrition neglect. She was leading the design, using everything we went through to help find kids like we were. She talked fast, training nurses, connecting families, early intervention changing lives. She told me about 2 cases where kids were removed from dangerous homes. Her voice got thick. "Every child I help," she said, Feels like saving our younger selves, like going back in time and giving that little girl in the basement the protection she deserved. I understood exactly what she meant. We were both trying to make sure no other kid had to live through what we did. Keith texted a few days later, asking if he could bring Grace to meet Colleen and Jack. He wanted the people he cared about to know each other. I called Colleen. She was quiet for a moment, then said she was willing to let Keith into her life slowly, carefully, but she needed consistent effort from him. I texted Keith back. Colleen agreed. As I hung up, I felt a surge of pride for my sister, for being willing to take that risk. The letter arrived at my restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon. Carlos brought it to my office, a concerned look on his face. Mom's cramped handwriting. My hands shook a little. 3 pages. She was dying of some unspecified illness. Wanted to make peace, begging me to call. Manipulative, guilt-laden, full of phrases about forgiveness, family, not much time left. I took photos of each page and sent them to Russell. He called within an hour. Randolph from APS confirmed Mom was fine, perfectly healthy, just lonely, still trying to manipulate us. I sat at my desk that night, after the restaurant closed, staring at a blank piece of paper. Finally I started writing. I told Mom that I'd built a good life despite what she did. I was successful, happy. I had people who loved me, a career I was proud of. I told her she had no place in my future unless she genuinely admitted what she'd done and got serious professional help. I didn't sugarcoat. I didn't write with anger, just with honesty. 3 pages. I read it twice, sealed it, and mailed it the next morning. Russell asked if I wanted him to review it. Well, this was something I needed to do on my own terms. Weeks passed. No response. I checked my mail, my phone. Nothing. One morning I woke up and realized something profound. I was okay with her silence. I didn't need her apology anymore, because I'd given myself permission to move forward without it. That letter wasn't really for her, I realized. It was for me, a way of closing a door I'd left open for too long. Gregory said it was a major step in my healing. 2 years flew by. Keith finished his community college program. He invited Colleen and me to his graduation. We sat in the bleachers with Grace and Jack, watching him walk across the stage. When they called his name, we all stood up and cheered. Afterwards, he introduced us to his classmates. "My sisters," he said, pride in his voice. One classmate mentioned Keith talked about us all the time, about how we'd overcome difficult childhoods. Keith looked embarrassed but pleased. On the drive home I told Colleen, maybe we're actually becoming a real family, the kind we should have had all along. The culinary magazine interview happened 3 months after Keith's graduation. They wanted to feature my restaurant. The interviewer asked about my inspiration. I told her a carefully edited version of the truth. Learning to cook from necessity, turning something difficult into something beautiful. I talked about food safety, nutrition, how cooking became my way of taking control when so much of my childhood felt out of control. The article came out with a full spread. The response was huge. People shared their own stories of healing through food. The magazine editor said it was one of their most shared articles that year. Colleen's nutrition program hit its 1-year mark around the same time. She called me with the numbers. 43 children identified and helped. Families connected with resources. In 2 cases, suspected abuse reported. Kids removed from dangerous situations. Her voice got thick. "Every child," she said, "feels like saving our younger selves." Understood. Keith called me on a random Wednesday evening, his voice nervous and excited. He'd proposed to Grace. He said yes. He asked if Colleen and I would come to the wedding. Of course, I said. We'd be honored. Then came the harder question. "Do you think I should invite Mom?" Took a breath. "Keith," I said honestly, "that's your choice. But Colleen and I wouldn't attend if Mom is there. We've spent too long building healthy boundaries to put ourselves back in her presence, especially at an event that should be happy." He was quiet for a moment. He understood, he said. He'd think about it. He didn't invite her. And that day, watching Keith marry Grace with Colleen and Jack by my side, I finally understood that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who truly sees you, and who helps you heal. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love is walking away from the person who never could. Damn, why childhood was a battlefield, but it also forged me into the person I am today. It taught me resilience, ignited my passion, and ultimately, helped me find my true family. So, tell me, what's a tough family situation you've navigated, and what did you learn about yourself in the process? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to hear your stories.